Hi Graham, how are you?
Hey Jeremy, I'm really good. Thank you very much. Good to speak.
Well, we got there in the end, didn't we? We've had a few bumps in the road with this one, with being off sick and then a bit of technical gremlins and all sorts going on. So it's good to finally get there, and thank you for making the time. So interesting conversation, this one. So we want to cover MMC and particularly procurement of MMC and approaches to that, what we need from clients or what we would like from clients, the market and all that good stuff. But first of all, if you wouldn't mind giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself and the business, and then we'll lead off from there.
Okay, so my name is Graham O'Doherty. I'm one of the partners at a company called Any Offsite, and Any Offsite are MMC advisors. We provide developers, contractors, manufacturers with a solution to improve productivity in the construction industry. And we do this through collaborative working, integration of design for manufacture and assembly thinking, working with in the early stages with the design team and the client, and in the hopefully early stages, as people get it right, with the contractors and the manufacturers, but quite frequently that's a little bit further down the line as we progress through the weaver stages. And one of the services that we offer is the MMC procurement strategy, and then also, as anybody who's been to business school will know, implementation of strategy is always the downfall. So we can help with the integration of that as well.
Very good. And just on yourself, Graham, what's your background?
Well, I'm an air traffic controller, so it makes natural sense for me to come in to talk about design for manufacturing and assembly. But that's going back an awful lot of years. And in more recent years, I've spent the last 13 years working for modern methods of construction, either in the manufacturing or in the contracting side. I'm a project manager, so I'm an association of project managers, and that helps me to develop processes that can be adopted by those people wanting to use MMC, rather than just trying to put that round hole into a square peg. Doesn't always work.
Very good, very good. Oh, that's an interesting way into the industry. So I've seen some bits and pieces actually in the last couple of days from you guys in terms of a bit of a launch of a platform. And so do you want to just talk us through what that's about, and let's compare and contrast, I guess.
Yeah. So one of the ways that we look at procurement is not in its singular form. We try to look at things in a holistic manner, and that's why design for manufacture and assembly, DFMA, works really well for the way that we think. So we've got three partners in the business, one of whom is an architect, one of whom is an MEP contractor, and then there's me. And the way that we try to evaluate things is, let's first of all decide what is the best form of MMC, if any, to be using. And we do that using a tool that gives us metrics to measure the importance to each individual client. And those metrics can be anything that the client has as their strategic intent and goals and objectives for the project. We categorize those into social, economic and environmental benefits, and we then put in a scoring system, and we put reasons why we would recommend a particular type of system to be. We then extend to, that's one service that we offer, but then the procurement is a slightly different, it's an advancement of that system, and we advance that into procurement, because if we go by traditional design, bid, build type of contracts, or even design and build contracts, it doesn't work ever so well. Design, bid, build does not work for MMC, because you're specifying the everything down to the nth degree, whereas our view is that you need to specify a performance specification and then expand from there and see how different suppliers can meet that performance specification.
Fantastic. Well, we're aligned to the point of almost being competitors, I guess, because the mid-group approach isn't dissimilar, but as a contractor, we aspire to. It doesn't always, it certainly isn't the case often. Actually, we end up in that same scenario of bidding for work that is already at RIBA stage C or something, and then obviously unpicking it, reverse engineering things, even having to resubmit planning and all of that kind of mess. Whereas we've got on a framework recently, actually, the Southern Construction Framework for residential, where we were talking to some of their people this week about the aspiration to get engaged much earlier, to be able to do that value toolkit kind of work that your platform does, or that you're working on with clients, really, I guess, to understand what their aspirations are across that spectrum, to really be able to deliver value for them, and then specify the right products or combination of products and components to deliver their outcome. But as a contractor, I think it's great that you guys are in this space, because for one reason or another, the way the construction industry's traditionally worked, clients don't trust contractors, straight out the gate at RIBA stage 0 or 1 or whatnot. They think we're going to have them over a barrel or whatever it is, which isn't our approach at all. But convincing clients that they can trust us as their integrator or their delivery partner from that early is a really tough sell. So it's great to have you guys upstream from us, singing from the same hymn sheet, fundamentally, and perhaps we can come along and build the stuff that you've got that output spec for, because it gets us a gateway to the right sorts of conversations. So let's unpick those challenges, I guess, we have in those conversations with clients, and where fundamentally we need it to go, don't we? Because there's something like 800,000 of the 2.4 million people that work in construction are going to retire in the next couple of years. And that's quite an old stat, actually, and that didn't take it down. That was pre-pandemic. So we've had 1 million people return to Eastern Europe that, silently through the pandemic, many of whom, a reasonable proportion, worked in construction. So I don't think we're going to have any choice but to move to MMC. But we need clients to get into the right space with us, don't we? Because there's all manner of things that you need to do differently to enable us, people in the MMC game, to perform effectively, I guess.
I think there's that you've touched on an interesting topic about trust, and I think that only comes, well, let's unpick that a little bit. If we look at the way that construction is set up, is that it's on a project by project basis, and more often than not the project team will change from one hospital to the next hospital, or from one house to the next house, and that's where it's very difficult to gain that trust. When you do gain that trust, and if the person that you gain that trust with has delivered in a particular way, you will trust that. And we're human, we're mainly water, at least 60% of our body is water, we'll always take the easy route. And that's kind of what we do. And so to overcome that, and to try and prevent the issue where, if you go to an architect who's normally the first professional involved in a project, they know what they know and they like what they know, and they implement their system, and we would normally end up with some exceptionally well-designed buildings, but they're not necessarily well designed for manufacture and assembly. And then all of the work happens after the beautiful pictures come out, and all of the technical work has to be done during RIBA 3 and RIBA 4, and it's then unpicking all of that, as you just said, trying to turn it into something that it was never intended to be. And what we're trying to do is to get in at the early stages, where if we can gain the trust, because we're not a big contractor trying to make money from delivering things, we're trying to offer advice, and our fees are very small. So, but they offer exceptionally good value, and so that's the kind of reason why we felt that there was a gap in the market, and why we set Any Offsite up a few years ago now.
Oh no, I completely get it. I think between you and there's one or two other consultancies in the space, isn't there? But it's got to grow. I think you guys are real trailblazers. Because you touched on a really interesting point. So we're trying to influence Crown Commercial Services, for instance, on their next MMC framework. We're through their market engagement. Along these lines, we're trying to influence politicians, because what we're finding, lots of politicians and civil servants, fairly senior people in government, are using the letters MMC as kind of the answer to everything. They're telling Boris that it's the answer to everything in how you can deliver these big programs for not enough budget if you were going to deliver it traditionally. But fundamentally, you can tell quite quickly that they don't know what it really means. And certainly, they clearly don't know what the implications are for the supply chain and for manufacturers at the kind of, so there's only about £1 billion worth of turnover in the MMC supply chain in the UK currently. If you've got the National Hospital Programme at 26 billion or whatever it is, you've got the schools programmes at 8 and growing, prisons are going on, and that's not to mention residential and the rest of it, with Homes England driving that agenda. Actually, we need the government to industrialise the MMC supply chain if they want to build all that stuff, and particularly if we want it to be more and more British post-Brexit, less importing and all that kind of stuff. But the key factor in all of that is certainty, is the message we're playing to stakeholders that we can try and influence, and hopefully some of the big boys, the big tier one contractors, will get into the same space of influence. That we need programs of projects where we can invest in R&D and innovation, but the manufacturers can see a smoothed pipeline of work for their assembly and their manufacturing facilities. There's so much money in that. There's so much risk that's priced in if you're just procuring individual jobs. As soon as that assembly line goes quiet or has a blip or peaks and troughs, there's so much inefficiency in that, and we just need the production lines to sing. It's something like 20% saving if we get that right. That's a hell of a lot of money.
I think that there are 100%. There are most definitely savings to be made within industrialised manufacture of components that will support the construction industry. And I think one of the areas that I'm quite keen to expand on is that construction is construction, and car making is car making, and any other form or any other industry is what it is. I don't think there should be sub elements of the construction industry. So I don't think there should be a modern method of construction. I don't think there should be an off-site form of construction. I think there should be construction, and the best way to do it is. And I think I do get a little bit fed up of hearing the us and them discussion going on between the different camps. And I think really there's construction. We all want to do things that are sustainable. We all want to do things that will be viable. We want to do things that will that will contribute to wellness and well-being of the people who are using and observing the buildings that we deliver. And so I think that there's a lot more to it than let's use off-site and let's use MMC. And I think that in itself does create a bit of an issue in people's minds. And so I just think to have one industry and let's find a way of working together with all the people in there. It's a big complex environment. Let's not make it more complex than it needs to be.
Oh, I completely agree. And to be honest, it's going to have to happen one way or another, in my view. So it will happen in the coming years. We might as well make it an efficient transition to that space, because I completely get where you're coming from. And I guess the other aspect is the mid-group model is to try and get engaged with clients as early as possible, and that the design team work for or with us. So perhaps there's a QS that sits alongside us as the technical commercial conscience, checking what we're doing, benchmarking and all that stuff. But rather than have an architect engaged, and then we come along afterwards and try and reverse engineer that MMC approach out of their design, where we've been successful, if you take Broxbourne School, for instance, in Hertfordshire, We took Bond Bryan along with us, and they designed the school using our pre-assembled supply chain of components and our BIM library of components. So we've got what we call our optimized component-led approach. We've got our library of components all BIMmed up, ready to go, that they can drag and drop, so they can not have to worry about the boring stuff. They can focus their design efforts on the bits that are important. That school was a hybrid of different MMC methods, to give them greater circulation space and something interesting for an atrium space and all sorts. But you get where I'm coming from. You catch the drift.
Yeah, the model that we try to promote, but is frequently pushed back, is exactly as you describe, where you have a client who's ultimately responsible for delivering the building, or they're accountable for it, but they're passing that responsibility to a design team, and then to a principal contractor. And then the way that we look at it is that Midgroup are one of very few who can actually also manage the off-site construction element and the kit of parts. You've got your suppliers, and we very much promote that it could be one or it could be two organisations that are doing that, and it could be a construction manager. We call it an MMC construction manager. Mm-hmm. And whether they're the principal contractor or not actually doesn't really matter. But what does matter is that if you're a principal contractor used to doing everything, you may have to get used to not doing all of it and having a smaller package than you would have in the days of very site-intensive ways of building. And so I think we were fully aligned in that way, and having that kit of parts. And if you think whether those kit of parts are delivered to a factory and assembled into a volumetric MMC1 type of system, or whether they're delivered to site and assembled on site, all you need to concentrate then is on the interfaces between the components and the sub-assemblies. And
and the environment, the enabling works, and all of the stuff that where you're plonking it, as it were. I mean, again, we're unusually comfortable with that scenario. We talk about being an integrator. So we contractually at the moment, we operate as a main contractor, usually on two-stage deals that end up being fixed price, etc. And we're taking all the risk and the usual stuff, although as MMC'd up as possible. But as the world transitions, so on big programs, whether it's the hospital program or whatever it is, we could see ourselves acting as an integrator where, in effect, it's more like CM in terms of a form of contract. The client's got the contracts for all of the kit. They've procured their SIPS panels or whatever it is, and they've got them sitting in a bonded warehouse, and we just call on them and fit them to manage the placing of those on site, installation on site, as a super project manager, I guess. That's up for grabs.
I think you've touched on some interesting things there in terms of the form of contract, and there's been some excellent work done by David Mosey, and he's published something called it's Constructing the Gold Standard.
Yeah,
and that's an excellent document that will give an awful lot of information on how to procure using a framework alliance contract instead of what most people are used to, the JCT or the NEC suite. And there are ways of doing it and making sure that if it's public money that you're spending, that you're getting best value. And I think another interesting point that you raised is I was in a factory this morning, an absolutely fantastic factory at Stuart Milne, now Donaldson's timber frame, and it is so well run, it is so smooth in its operation, it's really efficient, it's really productive, and what they do is structural walls, floors, roofs. But then there's all the other components that they're relying, and the construction industry and we as taxpayers in the UK are relying on somebody else to put together the kit of parts. And what Stuart Milne will become is one element of that kit of parts. and then we need to get the rest of it to line up with, align, and the interfaces work properly. And so I think there needs to be a more holistic view. And so while Stuart Milne have got all theirs sorted, I think there needs to be that holistic kit of parts, whether it be a manufacturer, whether it be an integrator, or whether it be an MMC construction manager or the principal contractor, all of those with the skills, and making sure that the initial design team have the skills and knowledge to know how these things go together.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've got the scars of that process over the sort of 6 years, nearly 7 years of business, that our approach has been to build on every project we build, is take the lessons learned and move it from one job to the next. And there's been lots of scars, I think, around that exact issue of tolerances, where you're bringing different components together. So we've done the experimentation, we've invested in the R&D with the supply chain to make sure we understand those interfaces and how things work, and we've learned from where things haven't gone so well. But it's been quite a hard journey, actually, as a small contractor. And you're quite right, whether it's Construction Innovation Hub or however we get there, how that stuff all works together and creates buildings for the long term that we expect free is going to be key, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a really important part to get right, and we all have a responsibility to work together in a collaborative and constructive way to deliver better quality, more sustainable buildings. And I think that's the absolute key to it, really.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Moseley's gold standard stuff, because a lot of that was to do with frameworks and trying to sort that market out. I think, again, if clients were listening, or professional teams, I was on a webinar actually that David was leading. I think it was an ICE thing last week or the week before, and I cheekily asked him the question, what does he think of DPS's, dynamic purchasing systems? Yeah. Because clearly that they're a long list of, you do, in effect, you do a PQQ to get on. You're on the platform then for a number of years, but the trouble is you're on the platform with any number of contractors. So there's one that we're on with a local authority that's got like 80 contractors on it or something, and they all get a shot at the title for every mini bid for everything, and everything's single stage in their scenario as well. So it's a disaster, really, in some ways, certainly for MMC. I think it was an approach to trying to bolt the market down, but the client could get 12, 15 single stage bids for individual jobs. But the key bit for me is that it completely takes away that certainty. Whereas well-run frameworks like SCF, there's a sharing, caring kind of model between the framework and its contractors around their pipeline, how they engage with end clients, and there's a sensible tendering process, albeit at the moment largely at stage 3 or beyond. But we're going to try and go on the journey with them and clients to get in a negotiation.
I think with all things in life, there's an opportunity for frameworks to be misused by commercial organisations in order to make themselves some money, and that happens in construction everywhere. It happens in frameworks equally, but there are some exceptionally good frameworks, as you've mentioned a couple already. I think there needs to be an understanding of what they can deliver and who they're going to deliver it with, and whether or not there is better ways of procuring. I don't know the answer, but I'm pretty certain that it's not only using frameworks. I'm pretty certain that there's partnerships that we do have a history of some of those. So I'm not sure that there's any.
Yeah. Okay. So what does the future? What does the next 5 years look like? How do you think things are going to pan out post Brexit and all that good stuff? Where do you think we're going to get to with MMC?
Well, if I could get political, I would say what on earth are we doing with Brexit? But anyway, I'm not going to go there because there'll be some people who strongly disagree with me. I think we have limited our choices to some extent, but I also think that we've got an opportunity to invest within our own expertise within the UK, and let's take that opportunity while it's there. I don't think things will change a great deal in the next 5 years. I think we're probably looking at another 10 years before things are starting to change, and that's with the new generation coming into construction, what they actually want to do and how they want to do it, and do they want to engage more with robotics? Do they want to engage more with automation? Do they want to engage more with digital type of tools? And I think the answer is probably yes. But what I don't want to do is to fool myself into thinking that everybody's like that, because I know an awful lot of people who still want to go and learn a trade. They will all be there. I think they all will, at least because the majority of buildings that are here today, 80% of them will still be here in 25 years' time, and they will need an awful lot of work doing on them. It isn't just about new build, it's about retrofitting, and it's about fitting out what's there. So,
for sure. Yeah, for sure. I completely get that. I mean, we know, for instance, that there's a huge program required in the school estate around what they call asset replacement, boilers, smoke alarms, fire alarms, all that kind of stuff. There's billions of pounds worth of kit that's out of date, past its life cycle. And then, of course, with the carbon agenda, hopefully COP26 and what we would have liked to have got out of it won't be forgotten. With the whole sort of Ukraine-Russia thing going on, I've got a horrible feeling that the impetus will be lost on some of that stuff and other things as the world is dealing with some fairly nasty stuff. Hopefully it comes to a conclusion very quickly.
I think, to get political again, the hideous events that are happening out in Ukraine at the moment are more likely to adversely affect our supply chain than Brexit, and I think it's a horrific situation for all those involved, and I think it's going to have a knock-on effect across the world.
Yeah, I completely agree, and of course, without toting our flag again, MMC can help with inflation issues, with supply issues, because we're ahead of the chain. We're buying kit earlier in order to manufacture it and all that kind of stuff. It does help diffuse and give as much cost certainty as you can get in construction in many ways. So there's something for that. Just something you mentioned in terms of people, young people coming into the industry, etc. Something we're grappling with in framework bids and mini bids and things like that at the moment. Clearly, obviously, and quite rightly, we get asked lots of questions as a contractor around social value. And there's quite a big problem in our model and the future of construction, in that the apprenticeships and jobs will end up being in the factories rather than on site. You're going to have less trades on site, which of course is safer, more efficient and all that good stuff, but it potentially takes jobs away from the locations you're constructing in if those locations don't have the manufacturers. So I'm thinking like the Western Gateway across South Wales, the Southwest, Bristol, that kind of neck of the woods. There's hardly any MMC manufacturing capacity in that zone at all. Of course, it's in places like Coventry and the northeast around Hull and things like that. And so, we're telling a story. It comes back to the certainty thing to a point that, if clients give us a program of work, then we can talk about a pop-up factory for sub-assembly and then fully assemble on site, those kind of things. But it's fairly theoretical at the moment. But
I think it's really fascinating, because it feels to me that there's some very odd social factors that local authorities put into their bids, and not only local authorities but other public sector organisations, housing associations. I was talking to one only this morning about it, and they want to know that you've done work in the local area and that there may be some employment opportunities within the local area. It strikes me that the employment opportunities should be within the UK, and maybe we even say within the world, but we're so myopic in the way that we look at things, and we look at things in such a a localized way, I really think we need to expand that out and say, well, what are the social benefits on a much broader scale, rather than just saying for my street, for my town, for my county, for my country, for my region. However it works out, I think we should be looking at it on a much bigger scale than we are. And I think that's one of the factors that those who are opposed to modernising and improving the productivity in construction, I think it's one of the factors that is a strong case for not doing anything.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, what you tend to find with industrial revolutions, though, if we're kind of facing the fourth one, is that there aren't less jobs, it's just the jobs are different and in different places. And so I kind of get where you're coming from in terms of that overly localized agenda. I think we should focus on UK, and that's probably the right message. But there is a great future-proofing of skills in MMC. You know, if we can look at high-tech manufacturing, if we can try and gain some ground back on automotive, for instance, which is 40 years ahead of construction in productivity, you know, we're future-proofing skills and jobs there, rather than, you know, jobs on sites that are going to be less required. Although you're quite right with retrofit, etc., there will be jobs required. So yeah,
I think there's a long-held belief in economics that if you build houses, employment opportunities will follow. So if you're a housing association looking for local reason to build houses from a social perspective, then don't just look at, well, the houses will be built and therefore we'll have people on site. Look at what employment opportunities that housing will bring to your area in the longer term. And I feel that there isn't any of that happens. And I think maybe laws of economics are ignored sometimes, which is frustrating.
Yeah, and there's obviously things like significantly less vehicle movements around site, you know, significantly less carbon impact in our approach compared to traditional methods, and even things just like disruption. You know, our black and white building, the timber office building we're building in Shoreditch at the moment, you know, it's got an electric crane, and that's it. There's no concrete crushing machines with dust and vibrations. There's none of that kind of stuff. There's no real plant on site at all. Is
that your CLT building?
Yeah, well, it's more than CLT. It's completely timber. So it's got a CLT core, but it uses other timber products for floors and beams and all.
I walked past it in the rain on Tuesday with the tube strike. It looks absolutely fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it being finished.
Yeah, well, we'll have to give you a tour. It is absolutely awesome. I mean, it's we've got an episode of the podcast about it, actually, the first episode with Graham, the project lead, that people can listen back to. But basically everything apart from the glass and wires is wood. And, you know, there's been some lessons learned about how to use the material, waterproofing of it during construction and things. There's been some challenges, but the benefits are huge, and not just in terms of the obvious carbon stuff. Obviously it'll be net zero in construction and operation, but it's things like you can take chunks out of some of the beams for services, and you can design that in using the BIM model before it ever gets, you know, the wood is cut, kind of thing. It's all come together digitally and then on site beautifully, and the tolerances are spectacular. So the lift installers were overwhelmed with how close the tolerances were compared to what they're used to with concrete structures, etc. So yeah, it's pretty cool what we can do if people give us a shot at it, you know.
Yeah, I'd love the opportunity to go around that site. Actually, we must organise it. That's a request there, Jeremy, straight away. I'd really like to do it.
Recorded on the podcast as well. Very good. Well, thank you very much for your time, Graham. That's been a really useful chat, and you know, I think you've got an interesting business in an interesting time, similar to us. It's kind of, the game's got to come our way, I think.
Yeah, I think so, and I think there's many ways to collaborate across the whole sector, and I think that's something. Well, I know that's something that I'm really keen on, and I think that's something that you've demonstrated keenness for as well.
Very good. Thank you very much, chap. We'll see you next time.
Nice one. Thanks, Jeremy. Cheers, buddy.